Welcome back, pop culture detectives. We all know BTS's golden Maknae, Jungkook, as the absolute epitome of talent and humble charm. But what happens when the internet suddenly explodes over alleged rude remarks dropped casually during a late-night live broadcast? Did the global superstar genuinely cross the line, or is there a massive emotional twist hiding right behind the missing context? Could a simple misunderstanding actually threaten his pristine worldwide image? Get ready to dive deep into the raw facts, the hidden background, and the absolute truth of what truly went down behind that glowing screen. Are you ready to uncover the real, untold story before blindly judging the viral headlines? Let's break it down.
Number 7. The Midnight Spark, Lost in Translation. Picture this. It is roughly 2 a.m. in Seoul. The city lights are flickering into the quiet dawn, and millions of people around the globe are glued to their glowing smartphone screens, sharing an incredibly intimate, unfiltered moment with one of the biggest pop stars on the planet, BTS's very own golden Maknae, Jungkook. If you have ever tuned in to one of Jungkook's legendary marathon-length Weverse live streams, you already know the exact vibe we are talking about. It is usually a comforting, deeply personal mix of spontaneous karaoke sessions, folding laundry, sipping on some late-night drinks, and talking to the fans, his beloved ARMY, like they are his oldest, closest friends sitting right there in his living room. But on this specific fateful night, the cozy atmosphere suddenly took a sharp, unexpected detour that would ignite a massive firestorm across the internet and leave everyone questioning what they just heard. It all started when a seemingly harmless, yet subtly invasive comment popped up in the endless, rapid-fire waterfall of the live chat, prompting Jungkook to lean in, read the screen with a slightly furrowed brow, and deliver a response that stripped away the heavily polished, PR-trained idol persona, revealing a raw, blunt, and unapologetically human side of the 20-something artist. Now, before we grab our pitchforks or blindly rush to his defense, we have to pause and dive deep into the fascinating, complex world of linguistic nuances, because this is where the edutainment truly kicks in and the real story begins to unfold before our very eyes. In the Korean language, the distinction between formal speech, known as 존댓말, and casual speech, known as 반말, is deeply ingrained in the culture, dictating the strict boundaries of respect and social hierarchy in every single interaction. When Jungkook responded to that crossing the line comment, he naturally slipped into a more comfortable, slightly assertive Busan dialect, his hometown roots proudly showing, using a colloquial phrase that, to a native speaker, perfectly conveyed a boundary-setting, "Hey, let's not cross the line here" kind of mild frustration, something you would naturally say to a close friend who is being just a little too pushy or overstepping their bounds. However, the absolute tragedy of our modern, hyper-connected digital age is that we rely far too heavily on cold, contextless auto-translation tools and the ruthless attention-grabbing culture of 5-second TikTok and Twitter clips that completely strip away the tone, the facial expressions, and the absolutely crucial cultural background. Within mere minutes, that nuanced, boundary-setting moment was violently chopped up, viciously mistranslated into a harsh, aggressive English insult, and plastered across every gossip site and anti-fan forum with screaming, clickbait headlines, branding the golden Maknae as rude, arrogant, and disrespectful to his fiercely loyal fans. Imagine the sheer emotional whiplash of waking up, checking your phone, and seeing your name trending worldwide for all the wrong reasons, simply because a machine failed to translate your basic humanity and a troll wanted some quick clout. The speed at which the outrage machine operates is truly terrifying. It preys on the vulnerability of public figures, feeding an insatiable, dark hunger for drama and the toxic desire to see the incredibly successful stumble and fall from their unimaginably high pedestals. For Jungkook, a young man who has practically grown up under the crushing, microscopic scrutiny of the public eye since he was just 15 years old, the pressure to be absolutely flawless 24 hours a day, 7 7 days a week is a suffocating burden that most of us could never even begin to comprehend. He has always been the idol who bends over backwards to show his endless gratitude, the one who bows a full 90 degrees to junior staff members, the one who literally tattooed the name of his fandom on his knuckles so he would never forget them for a single second. Yet, in the blink of an eye, a single, aggressively mistranslated sentence threatened to completely overshadow a decade of proven, humble, and kind character. The atmosphere in the fandom was incredibly tense, a chaotic, emotional mix of deep confusion, fierce defense, and genuine heartbreak, as Korean-speaking armies quickly mobilized to frantically provide accurate translations, desperately trying to drown out the loud, malicious noise with pure facts and vital context. But, as the old saying goes, a lie can travel halfway around the world while the truth is still desperately trying to tie its shoelaces. This whole ordeal forces us to stop and reflect on the deeply parasocial relationships we build with celebrities. We constantly demand authenticity. We beg them to be real and unfiltered with us. Yet the very moment they display a completely normal human reaction, like mild annoyance or healthy boundary setting, the fragile illusion shatters and the internet turns on them with terrifying speed and absolute ferocity. It begs the challenging, uncomfortable question: do we actually want our idols to be real, breathing humans, or do we just want them to be perfectly programmed, smiling robots who nod and agree with absolutely everything we say? The controversy was a massive industry-wide wake-up call, a stark reminder that behind the global superstardom, the record-breaking Billboard hits, and the sold-out screaming stadiums, there's a real person desperately navigating the terrifyingly thin line between staying true to himself and appeasing a global audience that speaks dozens of different languages and holds vastly different cultural expectations. You see, the fascinating thing about the human brain is how quickly it latches on to negativity. Psychologists call it the negativity bias, a powerful survival mechanism that, in the modern, fast-paced world of pop culture, completely weaponizes minor, easily explainable misunderstandings into massive career-threatening scandals that can easily derail years of blood, sweat, and tears in the matter of mere hours. The emotional toll this takes on the artist is rarely discussed in the flashy, glamorous world of entertainment journalism. But if you truly put yourself in his shoes, sitting alone in that quiet room after the broadcast abruptly ended, realizing that your genuine attempt to connect and be real was aggressively weaponized against you, it paints a profoundly lonely and heartbreaking picture of global fame. This whole ordeal really begs us to look in the mirror and ask ourselves hard questions about our own digital consumption habits. Are we far too quick to judge, and are we actually part of the massive problem when we mindlessly share sensationalized, out-of-context content without doing our own research? Jungkook's ordeal serves as the ultimate real-time case study in the extreme dangers of the internet echo chamber, perfectly illustrating exactly why we desperately need more empathy, more patience, and a whole lot more cultural understanding before we angrily type out those hateful comments and hit send. Because behind every single pixelated screen is a beating heart, a fragile human spirit, and a young artist just trying to navigate the overwhelming, chaotic noise of the world while staying incredibly true to the music and the fans he loves so deeply. As the sun fully rose over Seoul and the viral clip continued to spread like a devastating, uncontrollable wildfire, a heavy, suffocating silence fell over big hit music and Jungkook's personal social media channels, leaving millions of fans holding their breath, waiting and intensely wondering how this unprecedented situation would be handled, setting the ultimate stage for one of the most raw, emotional, and game-changing clarifications in modern K-pop history, proving that sometimes you have to walk straight through the absolute darkest storms of misunderstanding to find the most blinding, beautiful truth on the other side. But how exactly did he face this monumental challenge and reclaim his own narrative?
Number 6. The Unfiltered Truth, a Midnight Confession. Just when the heavy, suffocating silence felt like it was going to completely swallow the internet whole, a familiar, simple notification suddenly pinged on millions of cell phones across the globe, sending immediate shockwaves through the entire fandom. Jungkook is live.
There was no sterile, carefully legally approved corporate press release from Big Hit Music, no robotic, forced apology letter typed out on a blank white square and posted to Twitter, and absolutely no hiding behind a massive team of highly paid public relations managers or crisis management experts. Instead, the golden Maknae did exactly what he has always done best. He grabbed his phone, sat down in the quiet, comforting sanctuary of his own home, and decided to look his millions of fans directly in the digital eye to clear the air once and for all. Imagine the sheer, terrifying courage it takes to willingly turn on a live camera and face an audience of millions when you know that practically half the internet is actively tearing apart your every spoken word, scrutinizing your every micro-expression, and desperately waiting for you to make another supposed mistake to fuel the viral outrage machine. But when the screen finally flickered to life, we did not see a defeated, heavily scripted pop star reading from a teleprompter. We saw a bare-faced, profoundly honest 20-something young man who simply looked incredibly exhausted by the endless, toxic cycle of fake news and malicious rumors. He started the broadcast with his signature soft chuckle, immediately diffusing the agonizing, suffocating tension that had been building up for days, before diving straight into the massive elephant in the room with a level of raw, unfiltered transparency that is almost completely unheard of in the tightly controlled, hyper-manicured world of the Korean pop music industry. He gently yet firmly explained that his Weverse live sessions were deeply sacred to him. They were his ultimate safe haven, a rare, precious window where he could strip away the heavy golden armor of being BTS's Jungkook and just be Jungkook, a regular guy who wants to share his late-night thoughts, sing a few impromptu songs, fold his laundry, and hang out with the people who have supported him through thick and thin since he was just a starry-eyed teenager carrying a massive, oversized backpack through the busy streets of Seoul. He addressed the controversial viral clip head-on, completely refusing to let the malicious mistranslations and the clickbait headlines dictate his own personal narrative for another second. With a calm, steady voice that carried a heartbreaking mix of vulnerability and firm resolution, he explained the crucial cultural nuance of his words, clarifying that his casual, assertive tone was absolutely not born out of arrogance or disrespect, but rather out of a genuine, comfortable closeness he felt with his fans, a deep, unspoken bond where he felt safe enough to gently say, "Hey, please don't cross this line," without the terrifying fear of being instantly villainized or abandoned. He actively challenged the deeply flawed, toxic expectation that K-pop idols must constantly operate as flawless, emotionless customer service representatives, asking his global viewers an incredibly profound and challenging question. If we truly are close, if ARMY and BTS are genuinely like family, as we always say, shouldn't we be able to be completely honest with one another? Shouldn't a family member be allowed to clearly state when something makes them uncomfortable without being dragged through the digital mud and aggressively branded as a rude villain? This was a monumental, game-changing moment, not just for Jungkook, but for the entire idol industry as a whole, marking a definitive, powerful cultural shift where artists are finally beginning to bravely reclaim their basic human boundaries in an era where invasive parasocial relationships have completely blurred the incredibly dangerous lines between loving a musician and feeling a toxic sense of extreme ownership over their actual private life. The psychological weight of this dynamic is absolutely staggering. Imagine growing up with millions of strangers genuinely believing they have the absolute right to dictate how you speak, what you wear, and exactly how you should react to invasive, boundary-pushing comments in your own living room at 2 in the morning. Psychologists constantly note that when public figures finally push back against these intense parasocial boundaries, it often triggers a massive cognitive dissonance in the fans, who have developed unhealthy, obsessive attachments, leading to the exact kind of explosive, unhinged outrage we witnessed on social media.
Yet by sitting there and speaking his absolute, undeniable truth, Jungkook wasn't just defending his own character, he was actively educating his massive global audience on the critical, life-saving importance of mutual respect, eloquently proving that true love between an artist and their fandom isn't about blind, silent submission, but about healthy communication, setting boundaries, and deeply understanding each other's basic humanity. The emotional shift in the live chat was palpable and immediate. The frantic, anxious energy completely melted away in real time, replaced by a massive, overwhelming tsunami of purple hearts, deeply sincere apologies from fans who had briefly doubted him under the intense pressure of the media, and an incredible outpouring of fierce love that proved the unbreakable strength of their decade-long bond. He looked at the screen, reading the supportive, kind comments rolling by, and a genuine, deeply relieved smile finally broke through the heavy exhaustion on his face, reminding everyone watching exactly why he is so universally beloved and protected by his fans. It really makes you wonder, doesn't it, how many other brilliant, incredibly talented artists have been completely crushed, silenced, or forced into hiding simply because they didn't have the massive platform, the fierce personal bravery, or the unyielding loyal fan support to clarify their own truths when the entire world decided to aggressively misunderstand them for clicks and views. How often do we, as everyday consumers of this fast-paced, relentless digital media, blindly participate in the very same toxic cancel culture that we claim to despise, simply because we couldn't wait 5 minutes for a proper context or an accurate cultural translation? Jungkook's Midnight Confession wasn't just a simple PR clarification. It was a powerful, necessary masterclass in radical vulnerability, a brilliant testament to his unshakable emotional intelligence, and a loud, ringing declaration that he will never, ever compromise his own authentic humanity just to comfortably fit inside a neatly packaged, easily consumable idol box for the public's entertainment. The fallout from this incredibly raw, unfiltered live broadcast triggered an unprecedented massive wave of self-reflection across all social media platforms, forcing major K-pop news outlets and aggressive fast translation accounts to publicly reevaluate their incredibly damaging clickbait tactics. It became a true watershed moment, a definitive line drawn in the sand of internet history, where the fans collectively decided that enough was finally enough, launching organized, massive campaigns to educate newer fans about the complex, beautiful intricacies of the Korean language and the crucial importance of waiting for reliable, culturally aware translators before jumping to devastating, career-threatening conclusions. Think about the sheer, undeniable power of that ripple effect. A single, incredibly brave conversation held in the quiet, lonely hours of a Seoul midnight managed to actively change the way millions of people consume and interact with international media on a daily basis. This is the true, unparalleled power of BTS and their golden Maknae. They don't just break massive music records and sell out colossal stadiums in seconds. They actively challenge, mold, and elevate the global cultural conversation, constantly pushing us to be more empathetic, more patient, and significantly more human in our digital interactions. So, as we dive even deeper into this fascinating, emotional roller coaster of a story, we must ask ourselves the ultimate, challenging question. Are we finally ready to permanently dismantle the toxic, suffocating pedestals we place our favorite celebrities on, or are we simply doomed to continuously repeat this vicious, exhausting cycle of misunderstanding and outrage every single time a star dares to show us that they are, in fact, just as beautifully flawed, vulnerable, and gloriously human as the rest of us? The incredible, shocking answers lie just around the corner, as the immediate aftermath of this incredibly raw, unfiltered live broadcast sparked an entirely new, massive movement within the fandom itself that would shake the internet to its core, completely redefining how fandoms protect their own. But what exactly was this unstoppable movement that took over the digital world?
Number 5. The Purple Shield. A fandom revolution. When the sun finally rose on the global pop culture landscape the morning after Jungkook's incredibly raw and unprecedented midnight confession, the internet didn't just casually move on to the next viral trend. Instead, it witnessed the immediate, highly orchestrated awakening of one of the most formidable digital forces on the entire planet, the BTS ARMY. If you have ever underestimated the sheer, terrifying organizational power of a dedicated fandom, this was the exact moment that completely rewrote the rulebook on modern digital activism and crisis management. The immediate aftermath of Jungkook's broadcast wasn't just a collective sigh of relief, it was a massive, decentralized call to action that swept across Twitter, TikTok, Reddit, and Weverse like an unstoppable, righteous tidal wave, fundamentally transforming millions of fans from passive consumers into fierce, educated protectors of the truth. You see, the brilliant thing about this specific fandom is that it isn't just a group of people who simply like the same music. It is a massive, incredibly diverse global microcosm filled with lawyers, journalists, linguists, psychologists, and tech experts who all simultaneously realized that the traditional media had completely failed their artist. The malicious clickbait headlines that had violently dominated the trending algorithms just 24 hours prior were suddenly facing an absolute reckoning as the fandom collectively launched what can only be described as a masterclass in grassroots media accountability. Bilingual fans, the true unsung heroes of the international K-pop community, immediately mobilized into a hyper-efficient network of cultural educators, painstakingly breaking down the exact, nuanced Busan dialect Jungkook had used, creating highly detailed, visually engaging infographics that thoroughly explained the critical differences between formal and casual Korean speech, and actively distributing these linguistic lifelines across every single social media platform imaginable. Imagine the sheer dedication it takes to spend hours perfectly translating and culturally contextualizing a 40-minute live broadcast totally unpaid simply because you refuse to let a young artist's reputation be casually destroyed by a lazy automated translation tool and a handful of clout-chasing gossip bloggers. This massive, unprecedented educational campaign wasn't just about aggressively defending a pop star. It was a deeply profound sociological movement demanding a much higher standard of global media literacy, aggressively pushing back against the extremely toxic, fast food nature of modern internet journalism, where context is brutally sacrificed at the altar of viral engagement. Psychologists who study digital communities often note that collective action within a fandom can create an incredibly powerful sense of shared identity and purpose. But what we saw here was something significantly deeper. It was the radical, active dismantling of the incredibly toxic parasocial expectation that public figures must simply sit back and silently endure public abuse. By actively echoing Jungkook's brave boundary setting, the fans weren't just protecting him, they were deeply internalizing his message and actively policing their own digital spaces, creating a strict, community-enforced etiquette that aggressively rejected invasive comments, heavily discouraged the rapid sharing of unverified, out-of-context clips, and demanded complete, unyielding respect for the artist's basic human boundaries. The sheer scale of this digital pushback was absolutely staggering to witness in real time. Within mere hours, major entertainment news outlets that had hastily published the mistranslated, defamatory articles were suddenly flooded with thousands of polite, highly educated, and incredibly firm emails demanding immediate retractions and accurate cultural context. They weren't fighting toxic negativity with more toxic negativity. They were fighting absolute misinformation with an overwhelming, undeniable avalanche of irrefutable facts, effectively weaponizing the truth in a way that left the sensationalist gossip sites completely paralyzed and rapidly backpedaling to save their own crumbling journalistic credibility.
Articles were quietly edited, misleading tweets were rapidly deleted, and for the very first time in what felt like an eternity, the relentless, grinding gears of the viral outrage machine were forcibly ground to a complete halt by a community that simply refused to let a false narrative breathe for another second. This incredibly intense, unified response proves a deeply fascinating point about the incredible, largely untapped power of modern digital communities. When millions of highly organized, deeply empathetic individuals collectively decide to prioritize human decency over cheap, fleeting internet drama, they possess the absolute power to fundamentally bend the media landscape to their will and completely dictate the global conversation. The emotional resonance of this massive digital victory cannot possibly be overstated. For Jungkook, who had taken an incredibly terrifying, deeply vulnerable leap of faith by speaking his raw truth to the world, watching his fans instantly transform into a massive, fiercely protective shield must have been an unimaginably validating and deeply healing experience. It solidified a breathtakingly beautiful, unspoken contract between the artist and his audience. If you are brave enough to be absolutely real with us, we will be brave enough to fight for your truth against the entire world. This profound, incredibly rare mutual trust completely shatters the deeply cynical, widely held belief that celebrity fan dynamics are inherently shallow, transactional, or toxic, vividly proving that when built on a solid foundation of genuine, mutual respect and radical honesty, these massive digital communities can actually be powerful forces for immense tangible good in an incredibly chaotic and deeply misunderstood world. But as this incredible wave of fandom-driven truth began to effectively wash away the toxic remnants of the viral controversy, it slowly started to uncover a much deeper, significantly more insidious issue lurking just beneath the shiny, highly polished surface of the K-pop industry as a whole. The intense spotlight that had been aggressively forced onto Jungkook's completely normal human reaction suddenly illuminated a massive, industry-wide double standard that had been quietly suffocating artists for generations, making everyone realize that this isolated incident was actually just the very tip of a much larger, far more dangerous iceberg. If a star as universally beloved, fiercely protected, and monumentally successful as Jungkook could so easily fall victim to the crushing, toxic expectations of absolute robotic perfection, what on earth was happening behind the heavily closed doors to the hundreds of other young, deeply vulnerable idols who didn't have the massive luxury of millions of fans ready to instantly defend their every move? The conversation was rapidly shifting from a simple, isolated misunderstanding about a late-night broadcast to a massive, highly controversial debate about the fundamental, often deeply flawed human rights of idols within the notoriously strict Korean entertainment industry, setting the ultimate explosive stage for a massive cultural reckoning that nobody ever saw coming. But how exactly did this single, misunderstood sentence manage to spark an industry-wide revolution?
Number 4. The Shattered Illusion, a system on trial. As the massive shockwaves from Jungkook's fiercely honest midnight broadcast continued to aggressively ripple across the vast, interconnected landscape of global social media, the conversation violently shifted from a localized fandom dispute into a full-blown, unprecedented cultural reckoning that aimed its glaring spotlight directly at the deeply entrenched, historically oppressive mechanics of the billion-dollar K-pop industry itself. For decades, the incredibly lucrative Korean entertainment machine has been meticulously built upon a highly engineered, deeply fragile illusion of absolute, unwavering perfection, where young, starry-eyed hopefuls are scouted as mere children and subjected to years of grueling, intensely militant training regimens that completely strip away their normal teenage years and carefully mold them into flawless, smiling avatars of idealized human existence. The deeply toxic, unwritten contract of the idol industry is incredibly clear and ruthlessly enforced. In exchange for global fame, massive wealth, and the adoration of millions, you must willingly surrender your absolute right to basic human boundaries, completely commodifying your personality, your private time, and your emotional bandwidth to appease a rabid, hyper-consuming public that is actively encouraged to feel an intense, unparalleled level of ownership over your actual life. This intense phenomenon is deeply rooted in a concept that sociologists refer to as extreme emotional labor, where the artist is not merely selling a song or a slick dance routine, but is actively forced to sell the highly addictive, deeply parasocial fantasy of absolute unconditional accessibility, making the fans feel like they are intimately dating, raising, or personally managing the artist. When Jungkook, a superstar who sits at the absolute, untouchable apex of this highly demanding hierarchy, bravely dared to look into the camera and gently, yet firmly, tell a viewer to stop crossing the line, he didn't just break a minor unspoken rule of celebrity etiquette, he violently shattered the incredibly fragile, meticulously crafted glass ceiling of the entire idol consumer dynamic, sending an incredibly loud, undeniable message that idols are not customized robotic toys designed to absorb endless abuse and invasive demands. The immediate fallout from this single boundary-setting moment was absolutely staggering, acting as a massive, long-overdue catalyst that emboldened dozens of former and current industry insiders, anonymous trainees, and cultural critics to finally step out of the heavy, suffocating shadows and aggressively speak their own truths about the deeply devastating psychological toll of this dehumanizing system. Imagine the sheer, unimaginable psychological horror of living every single second of your existence inside a highly pressurized, transparent glass house, where every single micro-expression, every sigh of exhaustion, and every casually spoken dialect word is ruthlessly dissected, maliciously misinterpreted, and aggressively weaponized against you by faceless internet trolls and demanding fans who genuinely believe their monetary support buys them the absolute right to dictate your human emotions. Psychologists and mental health advocates within South Korea began heavily citing Jungkook's incredibly brave stance as a monumental, deeply necessary turning point in the urgent life-or-death fight for idol mental health, pointing out that the alarmingly high rates of anxiety, severe depression, and tragic burnout within the entertainment industry are the direct, unavoidable result of forcing incredibly young, deeply vulnerable human beings to operate as flawless, emotionless emotional sponges for the public's endless insecurities and demands. By refusing to apologize for his basic humanity and actively demanding mutual respect, Jungkook inadvertently became the highly reluctant yet incredibly powerful figurehead for a massive silent revolution brewing within the very heart of Seoul's entertainment districts, effectively giving a powerful, undeniable voice to a generation of artists who have been systematically silenced by restrictive contracts and the terrifying, paralyzing fear of public cancellation. The industry executives, who had long relied on the toxic "the customer is always right" mentality to heavily discipline their artists into forced, smiling submission, were suddenly forced to completely reevaluate their archaic, deeply harmful crisis management strategies, realizing that the modern, highly educated global audience no longer wants highly polished robotic perfection. They crave raw, messy, beautiful authenticity. This profound, industry-shaking realization sparked massive, heated debates in the boardrooms of major entertainment companies, fundamentally forcing a deep, uncomfortable reflection on whether the traditional, highly restrictive idol training system is actually sustainable in an era where digital transparency is absolute and mental health awareness is at an all-time global high. It is a deeply agonizing, incredibly complex transitional period for the industry, a violent clash between the old-school, highly traditional expectations of silent, bowing obedience and the modern, fiercely independent demand for basic human dignity. And sitting right at the absolute epicenter of this massive historical earthquake is a 20-something musician from Busan who simply wanted to fold his laundry and sing some songs without being aggressively micromanaged by strangers on the internet.
As we deeply reflect on the massive, undeniable magnitude of this cultural shift, it completely forces us to look inward and aggressively question our own toxic complicity in this deeply flawed system. Do we, as avid consumers of pop culture, subconsciously demand a level of flawless, robotic perfection from our favorite artists that we could never ever possibly maintain in our own messy, beautifully flawed lives? The profound, deeply emotional truth of the matter is that true artistry, the kind of breathtaking, soul-stirring music that BTS has consistently delivered for over a decade, requires a massive, terrifying amount of emotional vulnerability, and you simply cannot expect an artist to beautifully bare their soul in their music while simultaneously demanding that they completely lock away their basic, unfiltered humanity behind closed doors. Think about the profound legacy this leaves for the next generation of aspiring musicians who are currently sweating in tiny, unventilated practice rooms, desperately hoping for a shot at the spotlight. They are now watching a towering global titan boldly carve out a safe, fiercely protected space for human error, ensuring that the idols of tomorrow will not have to silently endure the same suffocating, dehumanizing pressures that have broken so many brilliant, shining stars in the past. It is an incredibly beautiful, profoundly inspiring narrative of a young man who took the incredibly heavy, toxic stones that the media maliciously threw at him and skillfully used them to build a massive, unshakable fortress of boundaries and self-respect, not just for himself, but for every single artist who has ever felt trapped by the crushing weight of public expectation. Jungkook's incredibly brave defiance wasn't just a fleeting, momentary blip on the pop culture radar. It was a massive, desperately needed declaration of independence that will undoubtedly ripple through the K-pop industry for decades to come, completely redefining what it actually means to be a global idol in the 21st century, and firmly establishing a bold, necessary new standard of mutual respect between artists and their massive global audiences. But just when everyone thought the massive dust from this industry-wide explosion had finally begun to settle, another incredibly shocking, completely unexpected development emerged from the deepest, most dedicated corners of the internet, revealing a deeply touching, globally coordinated effort that would completely flip the script once again and show the entire world the true, unparalleled beauty of positive digital impact. But what on earth did the global community do next to permanently cement this historic lesson?
Number 3. The global ripple, a wave of healing. When the digital smoke finally began to clear from the intense, multi-day battle against malicious mistranslations and clickbait journalism, the BTS ARMY didn't just quietly log off and go back to their daily lives. Instead, they orchestrated one of the most breathtakingly beautiful, highly coordinated pivots in the entire history of internet culture, proving that the ultimate, most devastating revenge against toxic negativity is an overwhelming, unstoppable tsunami of radical positivity. You see, being a fan of BTS has never just been about mindlessly consuming catchy pop music or streaming aesthetically pleasing music videos. It is fundamentally rooted in a deeply ingrained, decade-long philosophical ethos of self-love, profound empathy, and actively making the world a significantly better place than how you found it. As the intense conversation surrounding Jungkook's incredibly brave boundary setting began to deeply highlight the severe, often blatantly ignored mental health struggles faced by young idols and everyday netizens alike who are constantly subjected to the brutal, unforgiving microscope of social media, the fandom collectively realized they had a massive golden opportunity to completely flip the script. In the immediate aftermath of the broadcast, incredibly organized fan bases across dozens of different countries simultaneously launched massive, highly targeted charity campaigns, rapidly raising hundreds of thousands of dollars in Jungkook's name to be immediately donated directly to global mental health initiatives, crisis hotlines, youth centers, and anti-cyberbullying organizations.
Imagine the sheer, undeniable poetic justice of taking an incredibly dark, deeply stressful moment where a young artist was viciously attacked and intentionally misunderstood by the media, and actively using that exact same momentum to literally save lives and fund desperately needed psychological resources for vulnerable individuals across the globe. This phenomenon is something sociologists actually refer to as pro-social retaliation, a fascinating, incredibly powerful behavioral response where a massive group counters a perceived injustice not with more violence, anger, or toxicity, but with an overwhelming, highly visible display of extreme altruism and community building that completely neutralizes the original negative intent. The sheer scale and lightning-fast speed of these global charitable projects were absolutely mind-boggling. Within mere days, social media timelines that were previously choked with angry, anxiety-inducing arguments and frantic defense threads were completely flooded with beautiful, heartwarming donation receipts, inspiring stories of fans bravely sharing their own deeply personal mental health journeys, and incredibly supportive, life-affirming messages written in dozens of different languages, all united under the powerful shared realization that Jungkook's simple demand for basic human respect was a deeply universal struggle that resonated with millions of everyday people. Let's delve even deeper into the specific psychological mechanisms at play here, because understanding exactly why this happened is just as crucial as knowing what happened. In the highly complex, hyper-connected world of parasocial relationships, the fans' massive charitable response served as a crucial form of collective emotional processing, allowing millions of individuals who felt deeply hurt, intensely frustrated, and incredibly protective to heavily channel those complex emotions into something incredibly constructive, beautiful, and tangible. It actively dismantled the highly toxic, deeply cynical narrative constantly pushed by massive media conglomerates that internet fandoms are nothing more than screaming, irrational, highly volatile mobs, vividly proving instead that they can easily operate as highly sophisticated, deeply empathetic philanthropic networks capable of executing massive world-changing initiatives with the kind of ruthless efficiency that would make major non-profit organizations incredibly jealous. Furthermore, this massive wave of healing sparked vital, deeply necessary conversations in living rooms, classrooms, and online forums around the world about the critical importance of digital literacy and emotional intelligence, effectively teaching a brand new generation of young, highly impressionable internet users exactly how to critically analyze clickbait headlines, fiercely seek out accurate cultural context, and loudly defend the basic human boundaries of the people they admire online without resorting to blind hatred. The sheer, undeniable beauty of this massive, global movement lies in its profound, breathtaking simplicity. It all started because one incredibly famous young man, sitting totally alone in his room at 2 in the morning, simply decided that he was finally completely exhausted by pretending, instantly sparking a massive, beautiful chain reaction of raw honesty, fierce protection, and overwhelming global charity that completely and permanently changed the internet forever. This massive, unprecedented wave of global healing fundamentally forced the traditional media outlets to completely change their aggressively negative tune. The very same gossip sites and entertainment news platforms that had eagerly tried to tear him down just a few days prior were suddenly forced, through sheer, undeniable public pressure, to heavily report on the incredibly massive, undeniably positive real-world impact that his loyal fans were generating. This completely solidified his legacy, not as a controversial, rule-breaking idol who spoke out of turn, but as a deeply influential, incredibly positive force for massive global change, who inspires his followers to actively heal the world around them. It is an incredibly profound, beautifully touching reminder that the internet, despite all of its terrifying flaws, highly toxic echo chambers, and inherent deeply ingrained dangers, still holds the absolute undeniable potential to be an incredibly powerful tool for immense, unimaginable good when it is carefully guided by the right intentions and passionately fueled by a genuine, deeply rooted sense of community. For Jungkook, sitting thousands of miles away in his quiet Seoul apartment, watching this breathtaking, beautiful ripple effect unfold across his glowing screen must have been an incredibly overwhelming, deeply emotional experience, effectively transforming a moment of immense vulnerability and massive potential career-threatening misunderstanding into one of the absolute proudest, most deeply defining achievements of his entire life. It completely reinforced the beautiful, unshakable, ironclad bond he shares with the people who truly see him, deeply understand him, and unconditionally love him for exactly who he is as a living, breathing human being, flaws, boundaries, spontaneous midnight karaoke sessions, and all. But the profound, long-lasting impact of this incredible story doesn't just stop at massive charity donations and a forcibly shifting media narrative. It demands a much deeper, intensely personal reflection from every single person who actively consumes modern digital media, forcing us to look in the mirror and ask ourselves the ultimate, incredibly challenging question. When we are inevitably faced with a massive, viral storm of negativity and malicious misinformation on our own social media feeds, do we actively choose to be a passive part of the loud, destructive problem, or do we bravely step up, just like this incredible digital army, and consciously choose to become part of the beautiful, deeply healing solution? The massive cultural impact of this single, intensely misunderstood broadcast was rapidly cementing itself into the pop culture history books, permanently altering the way the world views celebrity, personal boundaries, and the absolute raw power of collective digital empathy. But just as the massive fandom was proudly celebrating this beautiful, hard-fought victory, an unexpected, deeply emotional final message from the man himself would suddenly drop from the digital heavens, perfectly wrapping up this chaotic saga and leaving the entire global audience absolutely speechless. But what exactly were the final, lingering words that Jungkook ultimately shared to officially close this incredibly intense, life-changing chapter of his extraordinary career?
Number 2. The final word, a promise of forever. As the intense global whirlwind of massive charity projects and fierce media reckoning slowly began to beautifully taper off into a deeply comforting, peaceful calm, the millions of fans who had tirelessly fought on the digital front lines were suddenly met with one final, incredibly touching surprise that perfectly encapsulated exactly why they had gone to such massive length to protect their beloved artist in the first place. Late one quiet evening, long after the aggressive, sensationalized clickbait headlines had been thoroughly buried and the overwhelming wave of global healing had firmly taken root, a simple, incredibly heartfelt message suddenly appeared on Weverse, directly penned by the golden Maknae himself, effectively bringing this chaotic, deeply emotional roller coaster to a profound and beautiful close. He didn't drop a sterile, heavily edited corporate video or a legally mandated PR statement formulated by a massive team of crisis managers. Instead, he simply typed out a long, deeply reflective and profoundly emotional letter, speaking directly to his army with the exact same raw, unfiltered honesty that had initially sparked the entire world-changing controversy just days prior. Imagine the incredibly heavy emotional weight of reading those carefully chosen words, knowing that the young man behind the screen had just weathered an absolute terrifying hurricane of public scrutiny and malicious misunderstanding, yet he still emerged on the other side with his incredibly soft, beautiful heart completely intact, and his unwavering love for his fans stronger than ever before.
In his incredibly eloquent, deeply moving message, Jungkook gently thanked his fans, not just for fiercely defending his character against the massive, toxic wave of fake news, but for taking an incredibly dark, negative situation and miraculously transforming it into a massive global force for undeniable, tangible good, proving once again that their bond is built on something significantly deeper than just catchy pop music and perfectly choreographed dance routines. He openly reflected on the intense, deeply terrifying pressure of living under the constant, microscopic scrutiny of the global public eye since he was just a teenager, acknowledging that while massive misunderstandings and highly malicious rumors will always be an unfortunate, completely unavoidable part of his extraordinary, record-breaking life, he is no longer terrified of them because he actively knows he has an absolute, unshakable army of brilliant, deeply empathetic individuals standing right behind him, completely ready to fight for the undeniable truth. This was an incredibly powerful, deeply emotional moment of permanent closure for absolutely everyone involved. It wasn't just a global idol saying a simple thank you. It was a deeply mature, incredibly evolved artist actively acknowledging the massive, terrifying power of the internet and consciously choosing to boldly focus on the absolute, undeniable beauty of the massive, diverse community he has painstakingly built over the last decade. Sociologists and digital media experts often discuss the massive, absolutely vital importance of closing the emotional loop in modern digital crisis management, and Jungkook did exactly that with an incredible, breathtaking level of emotional intelligence and profound grace, ensuring that the final, permanent, lasting narrative of this entire chaotic saga wasn't about the deeply toxic mistakes of the traditional media or the highly aggressive hatred of the clout-chasing anti-fans, but rather about the profound, unbreakable resilience of true, genuine human connection and radical empathy. He beautifully reiterated his absolute, unwavering commitment to always remaining fiercely authentic, bravely promising his millions of dedicated readers that he will never, ever allow the suffocating fear of malicious misinterpretation to completely silence his genuine, human voice or aggressively force him to hide behind a carefully constructed, completely robotic idol persona, because the very foundation of his unparalleled historic success is his sheer, undeniable humanity and his profound ability to connect on a soul-deep level. This powerful, deeply emotional declaration completely rewrote the archaic, deeply restrictive, and historically oppressive rulebook of the Korean pop music industry one final time, firmly establishing a bold, brand-new, deeply necessary era where musical artists are finally empowered to exist as complex, beautifully flawed, and deeply vulnerable human beings, and their massive fan bases are actively encouraged to fiercely protect those deeply personal boundaries with high-level education, profound empathy, and massive, world-changing global charity. The absolute emotional resonance of reading that final, incredibly beautiful promise was absolutely overwhelming for the global fandom. It literally felt like a massive collective exhale, a deep, profoundly restorative sigh of extreme relief after days of intense, suffocating, heart-pounding anxiety, fully validating every single exhausting, sleepless hour they had spent painstakingly translating highly nuanced videos, writing incredibly polite but firm emails to massive global news organizations, and rapidly raising hundreds of thousands of dollars for vital global mental health charities. It perfectly illustrated the profound, beautifully symbiotic, and completely unprecedented relationship between BTS and their massive army. When one unexpectedly stumbles under the massive, crushing, suffocating weight of the world's impossible expectations, the other immediately and fiercely steps up to carry the heavy load, beautifully proving to the entire watching globe that true, unconditional love isn't about demanding flawless, robotic perfection 24 hours a day, but about extending profound grace, deep understanding, and fierce, unyielding protection when it is needed the absolute most. As the final, incredibly comforting words of his massive, heartfelt message deeply resonated across the vast landscape of the internet, the massive, chaotic, highly destructive viral storm was finally, officially, and permanently over, leaving behind a brilliantly clear, incredibly beautiful, and completely transformed new digital landscape, where the incredibly dangerous, highly toxic, and deeply unnatural illusion of the perfect idol had been completely, permanently, and violently shattered, beautifully and irrevocably replaced by something significantly more profound, deeply authentic, and unimaginably powerful for future generations to witness. We must actively, consciously remember this massive, highly historic cultural shift every single time we log on to our incredibly loud, chaotic social media accounts, deeply internalizing the massive, highly critical, life-altering lesson that our casually typed words, our rapid-fire translations, and our split-second digital reactions carry an immense, undeniable, and truly terrifying weight that can literally alter the fundamental course of a young, highly vulnerable artist's entire life and massive career. Jungkook's incredibly brave, deeply personal journey through the incredibly dark, terrifying, suffocating fires of internet controversy and massive, highly weaponized global misunderstanding serves as the ultimate, deeply inspiring, and absolutely essential masterclass in exactly how to navigate the overwhelming, incredibly toxic, and deeply confusing modern global fame with incredible, unshakable grace, fierce, highly necessary personal boundaries, and an absolutely unyielding, profoundly inspiring commitment to the raw, beautiful, unfiltered truth. He ultimately proved to the entire watching world that you absolutely do not have to violently sacrifice your basic human soul or completely silence your genuine, authentic voice to comfortably sit at the absolute pinnacle of global pop music history. You simply need the terrifying, profound courage to boldly speak your unfiltered truth, the incredible, deeply earned wisdom to firmly set your human boundaries, and the absolute, unshakable, deeply beautiful support of a massive, highly dedicated global family who truly, deeply understands the beautiful, highly flawed, and incredibly brilliant human being hiding just behind the bright golden microphone. But as we beautifully, finally close the final, highly emotional chapter on this completely unprecedented, industry-shaking, world-altering saga, we are left standing on the edge of one final, incredibly massive, absolutely mind-boggling realization about the ultimate, undisputed, and permanently defining legacy of this deeply misunderstood late-night, midnight broadcast, setting the ultimate dramatic stage for our final, absolutely epic revelation. But what on earth is the number one, absolute most important takeaway from this entire highly chaotic pop culture phenomenon?
Number 1. The absolute truth. A human after all. When we take a massive, comprehensive step back to deeply analyze the absolute, undisputed magnitude of this entire, highly chaotic pop culture phenomenon, the ultimate, most profoundly important takeaway isn't just about a mistranslated Korean dialect, a late-night Weverse broadcast, or even the incredible, unprecedented mobilization of the global army. It is about the monumental, permanent death of the deeply toxic, historically oppressive, perfect idol myth that has suffocated the global entertainment industry for absolute decades. For the absolute longest time, the massive billion-dollar pop music machine has meticulously operated on a deeply flawed, highly dehumanizing transactional basis, where incredibly young, deeply vulnerable artists are brutally stripped of their basic, fundamental human boundaries and aggressively packaged as flawless, emotionless, endlessly smiling commodities designed purely for our absolute, unyielding digital consumption. But when Jungkook, arguably one of the most intensely famous, hyper-scrutinized, and universally beloved musicians currently walking the face of the earth, actively decided to completely shatter that suffocating, terrifying illusion by simply demanding a basic, fundamental level of human respect while hanging out in his own living room, he violently rewrote the fundamental, underlying laws of modern celebrity culture forever. This wasn't merely a fleeting, controversial blip on the ever-changing pop culture radar. It was a massive, desperately needed cultural reset, a profound, beautifully messy declaration of independence that echoed through the incredibly strict hallways of every single major entertainment company in Seoul and violently shook the highly toxic foundations of how we collectively interact with the people we admire on our glowing smartphone screens. The sheer, undeniable psychological brilliance of his quiet, midnight rebellion lies in its profound, breathtaking simplicity. He didn't scream, he didn't issue a highly sanitized, corporate-approved legal threat, and he didn't defensively hide away behind a massive wall of heavily paid public relations experts. He simply chose radical, unfiltered, deeply uncomfortable human honesty. By actively refusing to apologize for displaying a completely normal, entirely justified emotional reaction to a highly invasive, boundary-crossing comment, he forcefully held up a massive, uncompromising mirror to the entire watching world, violently forcing every single media outlet, every fast translation gossip blogger, and every digital consumer to aggressively confront their own toxic complicity in a deeply broken, heavily commodified system. Sociologists and modern media historians will undoubtedly look back on this exact, highly chaotic week as the definitive, undeniable turning point where the deeply ingrained, incredibly dangerous parasocial contract was finally, permanently renegotiated, successfully shifting the incredibly heavy burden of perfection off the tired, bruised shoulders of the artist and loudly demanding a significantly higher standard of critical thinking, profound empathy, and radical media literacy from the massive consuming audience. The incredible, absolutely unbreakable bond between BTS and their fiercely protective army was the absolute, undeniable catalyst that made this massive historical shift even remotely possible, proving beyond a shadow of a doubt that when a massive, highly organized global digital community actively chooses to operate from a place of deep, unwavering love and highly educated, undeniable truth, they possess the absolute, terrifying power to completely dismantle billion-dollar smear campaigns and permanently rewrite the global news narrative in a matter of mere hours. This powerful dynamic completely shattered the massive, deeply entrenched Western media stereotypes that historically painted K-pop fandoms as nothing more than hysterical, unthinking teenagers, forcefully proving to the highly skeptical international market that this massive global collective is actually a highly sophisticated, deeply intellectual, and fiercely mobilized socio-political force that absolutely demands accurate representation and deep cultural respect on the world stage. This entire emotionally exhausting saga perfectly highlights the absolute profound danger of the rapidly accelerating digital age we currently live in, a terrifying era where cold, highly unfeeling machine translation algorithms and a desperate, insatiable hunger for viral clickbait outrage can literally threaten to completely derail a decade of massive, unprecedented artistic achievement and deeply proven personal integrity in the devastating blink of an eye. Yet, simultaneously, it serves as the ultimate, deeply inspiring testament to the incredible, undeniably powerful resilience of the human spirit. It vividly shows us that true, authentic, deeply rooted human connection can absolutely survive and completely thrive even in the darkest, most highly toxic corners of the internet, provided that we are brave enough to aggressively fight for it. Think about the profound, deeply emotional legacy this leaves for the countless starry-eyed young trainees currently sweating in tiny windowless practice rooms, desperately hoping to one day capture a tiny fraction of that global spotlight, intensely analyzing the Melon Top 10 charts and dreaming of their own massive debut. Because of Jungkook's incredibly brave, deeply vulnerable stand, they are finally going to enter an industry where expressing a genuine, human emotion or setting a healthy, absolutely necessary personal boundary is no longer an immediate, terrifying career death sentence, but a deeply respected, highly encouraged hallmark of genuine artistic maturity.
We have fundamentally, permanently transitioned into an era where we no longer want our massive global superstars to be highly polished, completely unreachable, and flawlessly robotic deities floating high above us on an untouchable pedestal. We desperately want them to be beautifully, gloriously, and completely human, fiercely capable of making absolute mistakes, proudly holding firm, healthy boundaries, and bravely navigating the incredibly messy, highly complicated chaos of modern life right alongside us. As we finally, permanently close the incredibly thick, highly controversial book on this absolutely epic, world-changing narrative, the final, resounding echo isn't one of massive, lingering outrage or highly toxic internet drama, but of profound, breathtakingly beautiful liberation, a massive, collective sigh of relief knowing that the golden Maknae absolutely refused to be silenced, entirely refused to be aggressively misunderstood, and completely refused to be anything less than his incredibly brilliant, deeply authentic, and gloriously human self. He bravely walked straight into the absolute, terrifying eye of a massive, highly destructive viral hurricane and emerged on the exact opposite side completely victorious, beautifully armed with nothing but the absolute, undeniable truth, a deeply comforting Busan dialect, and the fiercely unyielding, completely unconditional love of millions who actively see him, truly know him, and will fiercely protect his basic human right to simply be Jungkook forever and always. So, the next time you find yourself aggressively scrolling through your highly chaotic social media feeds and you spot a highly sensationalized, deeply negative headline desperately trying to violently tear down someone's hard-earned character, actively remember this incredibly epic, highly emotional deep dive. Bravely take a profound, deep breath, vigorously demand the absolute, untainted cultural context, actively refuse to be a passive pawn in the deeply toxic internet outrage machine, and consciously choose the incredibly beautiful, significantly more powerful path of radical empathy, because that is the true, undisputed, and permanently life-changing legacy of the midnight broadcast that absolutely shocked the world.